The food that kept entire armies alive has been erased from almost every kitchen in America. Not gradually, not accidentally, gone within a single generation. Your great-grandparents knew crops that could feed a village through a siege, survive drought without irrigation, and keep soldiers marching when supply lines failed. Those crops did not disappear because they stopped working. They disappeared because the system that replaced them needed you to forget them. This video gives that knowledge back. Before we go any further, number 17 on this list was carried inside coat linings by resistance fighters during World War II because it was calorie-dense enough to replace a full meal and small enough to hide from guards. And number 20, this one fed entire civilizations through famines that lasted decades, and today it is classified as a weed in 47 states. If you believe some knowledge is worth protecting, hit subscribe. You are joining people who choose to remember what the world forgot. Here are 20 lost crops ancient farmers used to feed villages during war, ranked from remarkable to absolutely unforgettable. Number 1. Emmer wheat, the grain that fed pharaohs and soldiers alike. Long before the bread aisle existed, there was emmer. Triticum dicoccum. The ancient Egyptians called it the grain of the sun god and planted it along the Nile as far back as 10,000 BCE. It was not just food, it was currency, medicine, and military fuel. Egyptian soldiers marching into Nubia and Canaan carried emmer flatbreads in their packs. The forgotten moment came quietly. When industrial agriculture arrived in the early 20th century, emmer was replaced by modern bred wheat, higher yield, easier to hull, better suited to machines. Within 50 years, emmer had vanished from commercial farms across North America. Farmers who tried to hold on to it were priced out. Modern research has confirmed what ancient bakers already knew. Studies show emmer contains significantly higher protein, fiber, and magnesium than modern wheat. Research also indicates it has a lower glycemic response, making it gentler on blood sugar. The ancient grain world is paying attention again, and for good reason. Traditional use was elegant in its simplicity. Egyptian households soaked emmer berries overnight, then slow-cooked them with onion and cumin into a thick porridge that held energy for hours. That same preparation, whole berries, simmered low and slow, works in your kitchen today. Your grandmother's bread recipe deserves a grain that actually earned its place at the table. She would have recognized emmer. We forgot to ask her why she stopped using it. Number 2. Skirret, the root that kept medieval peasants alive through winter. Before the potato arrived from the Americas, European peasants had skirret. Siam cicerum. Roman soldiers planted it along garrison routes across Britain and Gaul as early as the 1st century CE, leaving seeds behind like breadcrumbs across occupied land. Medieval English households called it the poor man's parsnip, but that undersells it completely. The forgotten moment happened when the potato crossed the Atlantic. Within a century of its arrival in Europe, skirret was gone from most kitchen gardens. It required hand harvesting, was fussy about wet soil, and couldn't scale to industrial farming. The potato was easier, and the market followed the easier thing. Studies show skirret roots are rich in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria. Research also confirms significant levels of vitamin C and potassium nutrients that prevented scurvy and cramps in populations that had no access to citrus. This was not an accident. People who grew skirret stayed healthier through winter. Traditional preparation was straightforward. Roots were boiled until tender, then dressed with butter and pepper or roasted in hearth embers for a nutty sweetness closer to caramelized parsnip. The flavor has been described as sweeter than carrot, earthier than turnip. Is genuinely delicious. This plant outlived every empire that planted it. The Romans are gone. Skirret is still here, waiting in heirloom seed catalogs for someone to remember why it mattered. Number 3. Amaranth, the sacred grain the Spanish tried to erase. The Aztecs built an empire on amaranth. Amaranthus cruentus. By 1400 CE, Aztec warriors consumed toasted amaranth mixed with honey and human blood in sacred ceremonies and daily amaranth porridge that gave them one of the most nutritionally complete diets in the pre-Columbian world. When Hernán Cortés arrived in 1519, he recognized something immediately. This grain gave these people power. The forgotten moment is one of history's darker chapters. Spanish conquistadors banned amaranth cultivation under penalty of death. They understood that destroying the food source destroyed the culture. Within a generation, fields that once grew amaranth across Mexico were gone. The knowledge nearly died with them. Modern nutrition science has been playing catch-up ever since. Studies confirm amaranth is one of the only plant foods that contains all 9 essential amino acids, making it a complete protein. Research also shows it contains squalene, a compound studied for its potential role in reducing cholesterol and lysine, which is almost entirely absent from wheat. Traditional preparation involved popping the tiny seeds in a dry pan until they puffed like micro popcorn, then binding them with raw honey into dense energy bars called alegria. That exact process still works today. A tablespoon of seeds, a dry skillet over medium heat, 30 seconds of shaking, and you have the same fuel Aztec runners used to carry messages across mountain ranges. Caution: amaranth leaves contain oxalic acid, which in very large quantities can interfere with calcium absorption. Boiling the leaves and discarding the cooking water removes most of it. Moderation matters, as it did for the people who lived on this plant for centuries. We spent billions developing synthetic protein supplements. The Aztec solution grew to knee-height in 8 weeks and asked for nothing but rain. Number 4. Mashua, the Andean crop that fed armies and suppressed desire. High in the Andes where nothing else would grow, the Inca grew mashua, Tropilum tuberosum. At elevations above 12,000 feet, where frost arrives without warning, and the growing season lasts a matter of weeks, mashua thrived. The Inca military relied on it specifically because it grew where other crops failed, and because of one extraordinary additional property. The forgotten moment came with colonization. Spanish administrators dismissed mashua as peasant food and replaced Andean agriculture with European crops poorly suited to altitude. Inca crop diversity, which included dozens of potato varieties, multiple grains, and roots like mashua, was collapsed into a monoculture within 2 generations. Most of it never came back. Modern research has confirmed the Inca instinct. Studies show mashua contains glucosinolates, sulfur compounds also found in broccoli, with documented antimicrobial and anticarcinogenic properties. Research published in peer-reviewed journals also confirms what Inca commanders reported for centuries. Mashua appears to suppress testosterone production in men. The Inca fed it to soldiers specifically to reduce sexual aggression in occupied territories. Traditional preparation kept it simple. Mashua tubers were freeze-dried using Andean overnight frosts, a technique called chuno, producing a shelf-stable product that could be stored for years and reconstituted in boiling water. That preservation method fed Inca armies across campaigns spanning thousands of miles. Caution: due to its documented effect on testosterone levels, mashua is not recommended for men trying to conceive or those with hormonal conditions. This is a real pharmacological effect, not folklore. The Inca knew exactly what they were doing with this crop. Most Americans have never heard the word mashua. The Inca ran one of the largest empires in human history. These 2 facts are not unrelated. Number 5. Scorzonera, the black root European peasants called the plague cure. In 1565, during an outbreak of plague in southern Spain, a healer named Menards wrote that the black root of Scorzonera hispanica could draw poison from a snakebite and fight fever. He may have been right in ways he did not understand. Within a decade, Scorzonera was being grown in kitchen gardens from Spain to Poland, prized by peasants who had no doctors and no other options. The forgotten moment was gradual but decisive. By the early 1900s, modern medicine had declared herbal cures superstition. Scorzonera farming faded from Western Europe first, then from American immigrant gardens within another generation. Today it appears in almost no American seed catalog and on almost no American table. Studies confirm Scorzonera roots are rich in inulin, that prebiotic fiber that feeds gut bacteria, along with iron, potassium, and vitamin E. Research also indicates the latex in its roots contains compounds with mild anti-inflammatory properties. The plague-era healers were describing something real. They just did not have the language for it. Traditional preparation was simple and satisfying. Roots were peeled, boiled until tender, then served with brown butter and a squeeze of lemon, a preparation common in French country kitchens as recently as the 1940s. The flavor is mild and slightly sweet, somewhere between asparagus and artichoke. Your grandmother had a name for this. She kept it in her kitchen. We forgot to ask her why. Number 6. Fonio, the ancient West African grain that grows where nothing else survives. Across the Sahel, the brutal strip of land between the Sahara Desert and the African savanna, there is a grain that has fed villages through droughts that killed every other crop. Digitaria exilis. The Dogon people of Mali have cultivated fonio for more than 5,000 years. During the medieval period, it was traded across trans-Saharan caravan routes alongside gold and salt. That is not coincidence. The forgotten moment happened when colonial administrators replaced diverse traditional crops with cash crops they could tax and export. Fonio, which couldn't be easily mechanized, was abandoned. Within decades of colonization, entire food systems built around fonio and similar grains had been dismantled and replaced with imported wheat flour. The knowledge of how to grow it stayed mostly with village elders. Studies show fonio contains methionine and cysteine amino acids almost entirely absent from other cereal grains. Research confirms it has a very low glycemic index, making it useful for blood sugar management. It is also naturally gluten-free. West African nutritionists have been saying this for generations. Western science is only now catching up. Traditional preparation in Mali and Senegal involves steaming fonio, like couscous 2 rounds of steam, then fluffed with a fork and dressed with peanut sauce or stewed greens. It cooks in 5 minutes. It requires no tilling equipment, almost no water, and no fertilizer. It grows in sand. This one is still available in specialty grocery stores and online. Right now the question is whether you will recognize why it matters. Number 7. Lablab bean. The wartime legume that saved civilian populations across 3 continents. During World War I, as European food systems collapsed under blockade and rationing, British colonial administrators in East Africa watched local populations eat while occupied territories starved. The difference was lablab. Lablab purpureus, also called hyacinth bean, had been cultivated in India since 2500 BC, across Africa for nearly as long, and in Egypt by the time of the New Kingdom. It fixes nitrogen in the soil, grows fast, and produces pods, seeds, and leaves all edible. The forgotten moment came when the post-war Green Revolution promoted high-yield monocultures rice, wheat, corn as the universal solution to hunger. Lablab, which required local knowledge and multi-part harvesting, was left out. It was too complex for the industrial model. The knowledge of how to use it stayed with the communities that had never stopped growing it. Modern research confirms lablab's wartime reputation. Studies show it is one of the highest protein legumes available, with documented levels of lysine that complement grain-based diets. Research also confirms it improves soil quality through nitrogen fixation, meaning it feeds both the people who eat it and the land it grows in. Dual-purpose crops like this are extraordinarily rare. Caution: raw lablab beans and pods contain significant levels of cyanogenic glucosides, compounds that release hydrogen cyanide when digested. They must be boiled in water for at least 20 minutes, with the water discarded. This step is non-negotiable. Failure to do this has caused serious illness. The communities that grew lablab knew this step as automatic. We need to learn it again. Traditional preparation in South India involves boiling dried seeds, then simmering with tamarind, coconut, and dry-roasted mustard seed into a thick curry that is one of the most complete single-dish meals you can make from a garden. Most Americans touch this plant every summer in ornamental gardens without knowing what it can do. Is sold as a flowering vine. Is actually a food system. Number 8. Groundnut. Not the peanut. The American native that pre-colonial tribes traded like gold. When the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth in 1620, they were starving. The Wampanoag people showed them Hopnis apios americana, the groundnut. These small, string-linked tubers grew wild along the coast from Nova Scotia to Florida and had sustained indigenous communities through winter for thousands of years. The Pilgrims ate them, survived, and then spent the next 2 centuries replacing them with European crops and forgetting they existed. The forgotten moment was the American agricultural transition itself. As colonists plowed and planted in the European model, while groundnut patches were destroyed by tilling. By the 19th century, they had retreated to the edges of forests and riverbanks, consumed mostly by animals. Thomas Jefferson actually attempted to cultivate them for European export. That effort failed. The knowledge of how to find and prepare them essentially disappeared from American food culture. Studies show apios americana tubers contain 3 times the protein of potatoes and significant amounts of isoflavones, plant compounds studied for their potential role in hormonal health. Research has also documented their high calcium and iron content. For a wild harvested food that requires no farming, no irrigation, and no fertilizer, the nutritional profile is extraordinary. Traditional preparation among the Wampanoag and Lenape people was simple. Tubers were roasted directly in fire embers or sliced and fried in rendered fat. They taste like a nuttier, denser potato. Modern foragers describe them as one of the most rewarding wild foods in the eastern United States. We turned the land that grew these into lawns. Your great-grandmother's field may have been full of them. There is no way to know now the tilling already happened. Number 9. OCA, the Andean backup crop that never got its due. When the potato blight swept through Europe in the 1840s, wiping out the crop that a third of Ireland depended on, scientists scrambled for alternatives. One of the most promising was already growing in the Andes, where it had been cultivated since at least 3000 BCE alongside potato, maswa, and aluco. Oxalis tuberosa. The Quechua called it OCA. It was blight-resistant, high-yield, and could be preserved for years using traditional freeze-drying methods. Nobody in Europe adopted it. The famine killed 1 million people. The forgotten moment is one of agricultural history's most painful ironies. OCA was available. The knowledge existed. But European agricultural authorities were so committed to the potato and so resistant to exotic Andean crops that they let the famine run its course rather than adopt an unfamiliar solution. OCA remained confined to the Andes. The people who needed it most never got it. Modern research confirms OCA deserved far more attention. Studies show it contains high levels of oxalic acid, which requires management, but also significant amounts of anthocyanins, the same pigments in blueberries that studies associate with antioxidant activity. Research also confirms good levels of vitamin C and potassium. Andean communities manage the oxalic acid through sun-drying, which converts it to natural sugars and sweetens the tuber dramatically. Caution: OCA does contain oxalic acid in meaningful amounts in its raw form, which can be problematic for people prone to kidney stones. Traditional preparation sun-drying for several days before eating addresses this and also improves flavor significantly. Traditional sun-drying transforms OCA from slightly tart to genuinely sweet, similar to a sweet potato with a citrus undertone. Roasted after sun-drying is one of the most distinctive vegetables you will ever eat. This one is still growing across most of South America right now. The question is why we have never grown it here. Number 10. Teff. The grain Ethiopian warriors carried into battle for 3,000 years. Ethiopia has never been successfully colonized, not by the Romans, not by the Ottomans, and most famously not by the Italians at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. A major reason, historians argue, is Ethiopian food resilience. At the center of that resilience is teff. Aragrostis tef. Cultivated in the Ethiopian highlands for at least 3,000 years, teff seeds are so tiny that a single handful contains enough to seed an entire field. During sieges and campaigns, Ethiopian fighters carried teff in their clothing. A warrior could plant a new food source anywhere he stopped. The forgotten moment, in this case, is actually a suppression story. During Italy's 1935 invasion of Ethiopia, Mussolini's forces specifically targeted food stores, burning granaries, and attempting to destroy the agricultural base that had made Ethiopia unconquerable. Teff fields survived because the seeds are nearly impossible to fully destroy. Italy lost the long game. Teff endured. Studies show teff is the richest known grain source of calcium. A single cup of cooked teff provides more calcium than a cup of milk. Research also confirms high levels of resistant starch, which feeds beneficial gut bacteria. It is gluten-free, high in iron, and has one of the most complete amino acid profiles of any grain on Earth. Traditional preparation involves fermenting teff flour for 2 to 3 days, then cooking it into injera, the spongy flatbread that serves as both plate and utensil in Ethiopian dining. Fermentation increases B vitamin content and improves digestibility. Even without injera, teff flour can be substituted for up to a quarter of standard flour in almost any baked recipe. An empire tried to erase this grain. The grain won. That is not a small thing. Number 11. Aluco, the Andean crop with a secret the Inca kept for centuries. The Inca had a system of mountain storage facilities called calcas, cold warehouses built at altitude that used natural temperature fluctuations to preserve food for years without refrigeration. The crop most perfectly adapted to this system was aluco. Alucus tuberosus. Cultivated in the Andes since at least 5,500 BC, aluco is one of the few crops in the world that remains fully edible raw, no cooking, no processing, no preparation required. Inca runners on the road network called the Kapaknan carried them in pouches and ate them mid-stride. The forgotten moment is architectural as much as agricultural. When the Spanish dismantled the Calca network and replaced Andean infrastructure with colonial administration, the food preservation system that aluco depended on was destroyed. Without cold storage, aluco's advantage over other crops disappeared. Within a few generations of colonization, it had retreated to smallholder Andean farms and almost nowhere else. Studies show Aluco tubers are high in protein relative to other root vegetables, with documented levels of mucilage, the same slippery compound that makes okra gel, which research suggests may have prebiotic and anti-inflammatory properties. Research also confirms high vitamin C content and unusual stability under cold storage conditions. It is one of the most nutritionally complete roots nobody outside the Andes has ever heard of. Traditional preparation in Peru and Bolivia is uncomplicated. Aluco is sliced thin and stir-fried with dried chili, jerked meat, and potato in a dish called alaquito con charca, one of the oldest continuously prepared dishes in the Western Hemisphere. The texture is crisp even when cooked, like water chestnut. The flavor is mild and slightly earthy. Caution: Aluco seeds are very difficult to germinate conventionally, and almost all propagation is done through tubers, making sourcing outside South America genuinely difficult. If you find it, plant every piece. Your grandmother had no word for this. Neither did your great-grandmother. This one was hidden behind a mountain range and a language barrier for 5,000 years. Number 12. Cattail. The supermarket that lines every American wetland. There is probably a cattail marsh within 10 miles of where you are sitting right now. Typha latifolia. Indigenous nations across North America, the Cheyenne, the Ojibwe, the Paiute, the Iroquois, used every single part of the cattail plant for food across the entire calendar year. Pollen in spring. Young shoots in early summer. Green flower spikes. Ripe pollen heads. Starchy root flower in winter. One plant. 12 months of food. Zero need for a grocery store. The forgotten moment is not suppression, it is simply distance. As Americans moved into cities and suburbs, the knowledge of how to read a wetland disappeared within 2 generations. What had been an active food source became scenery. Children who once learned to harvest cattail pollen from their grandparents now walk past cattail marshes without knowing what they are looking at. Studies confirm the nutritional profile of cattail is genuinely impressive. Research documents that cattail pollen, which can be harvested by the cup in spring, contains significant levels of protein, calcium, and B vitamins. The starchy root flour, dried and ground from winter rhizomes, has been documented to contain more starch per pound than potatoes. Studies also confirm the young shoots contain vitamin C and potassium in amounts comparable to asparagus. Traditional preparation across tribes varied by season and part. Young shoots were peeled and eaten raw, like cucumber. Green flower spikes were boiled and eaten like corn. Pollen was mixed into flatbread batter. Winter rhizomes were pounded, soaked in water, and the settled starch was dried into flour. None of these techniques require special equipment. Caution: harvest only from clean water sources. Cattails bioaccumulate pollutants, including heavy metals. Urban wetlands and roadside ditches should be avoided. Rural, upstream wetlands are your safest bet. Know your water source before you eat from it. Danger: cattail has a toxic look-alike in the early shoot stage. Iris and blue flag plants grow in similar environments and are toxic, even deadly, if consumed in quantity. Learn the difference before you eat anything. The cattail shoot has a distinctive flat inner leaf structure. The iris shoot is round in cross-section. That difference is the one you need to know. Number 13. Tepary bean. The desert legume that laughed at drought and fed the American Southwest for 4,000 years. The Sonoran Desert, covering parts of Arizona, California, and northern Mexico, is one of the harshest growing environments in North America. Summer temperatures exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Rainfall averages under 12 inches a year. And yet the Tohono-O'odham people have grown tepary beans, Phaseolus acutifolius, in this desert for more than 4,000 years without irrigation. When every other crop fails, tepary beans produce. The forgotten moment is agricultural colonialism at its most direct. When the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs reorganized tribal land and agriculture in the late 19th century, it pushed commodity crops, corn, wheat, cattle that required water infrastructure the government then controlled. Tepary bean cultivation collapsed. Generations of Tohono-O'odham farmers who had fed their communities through droughts that would have destroyed European crops were told their agriculture was inferior. Studies show tepary beans have a lower glycemic index than any other commonly consumed legume, relevant in the context of native communities that now face some of the highest rates of type 2 diabetes in the world. Research published by the University of Arizona confirms tepary beans contain resistant starch and unique compounds that slow glucose absorption. The same communities that ate tepary beans for millennia developed metabolic disease when forced off them. The connection is documented. Traditional preparation by the Tejano Oatum involved slow-cooking dried tepary beans for hours with just water and salt, then using the thick resulting broth as a base for stew. The beans are also parched dry roasted and ground into flour for flatbreads that could survive desert heat without spoiling. Caution: like most legumes, tepary beans must be fully cooked before eating. Raw or undercooked beans contain lectins that cause acute gastrointestinal distress. Soak overnight, discard the soaking water, and boil until completely soft. We built an agricultural system that turned the most drought-adapted food in the American Southwest into a specialty product sold in artisan grocery stores at $8 a pound. The irony deserves a longer look. Number 14. Water caltrop, the war ration that sank beneath the surface and was never found again. In the waterways of China, India, and Southeast Asia, there grows a floating plant with a seed so strange it looks like a bat skull or a devil's head. Tropa natans the water caltrop. Chinese farmers have cultivated it in flooded paddies and lakes since the Neolithic period, roughly 3000 BC. During wartime, communities driven off farmland by advancing armies could retreat to rivers and marshes and survive on water caltrop harvests. The crop went with them because the crop was in the water. The forgotten moment in the Western context is abrupt and deliberate. Water caltrop was introduced to the northeastern United States in the late 1800s by European immigrants who knew its value. Within decades, state governments began classifying it as an invasive aquatic weed and running eradication programs. Today, it is illegal to possess or transport in several states, not because it is toxic, but because it grows aggressively in lakes and clogs waterways. The food value was never part of the conversation. Studies confirm water caltrop seeds are nutritionally dense. Research documents high starch, protein, and potassium content, along with antioxidant compounds in the hull. Traditional Chinese medicine texts note its use for digestive health, and modern research has identified triterpenoids in the plant with documented anti-inflammatory properties. Traditional preparation is simple. Seeds are boiled or steamed until the hull cracks, then peeled to reveal a white starchy flesh that tastes like a cross between chestnut and water chestnut. In China and India, roasted water caltrop is sold as street food. In Japan, it appears in upscale cuisine. In America, it is classified as a noxious weed. This is the pattern you have been watching build. This knowledge was not lost by accident. The question is whether you are going to do something with that recognition. Tell me in the comments which crop on this list shocked you the most and why. I read every single one. Every comment you leave is a data point that says this knowledge matters and should not disappear again. Back to the list. Number 15. Winged bean. The miracle crop the UN tried to scale and corporate agriculture quietly buried. In 1975, the United States National Academy of Sciences published a report called the winged bean, a high-protein crop for the tropics. The report called Sophocarpus tetragonalibus, grown across Papua New Guinea and Southeast Asia for centuries, a potential answer to global protein deficiency. Every part of the plant is edible: leaves, flowers, pods, seeds, and roots. The seeds contain up to 37% protein by dry weight. An international trial program was launched. The forgotten moment in this case has a name: the Green Revolution Pivot. By the early 1980s, development funding had consolidated around high-yield varieties of rice, wheat, and soybeans crops that suited corporate agricultural supply chains. Winged bean, which required local knowledge and didn't scale to monoculture, was defunded. The 1975 report collected dust. The communities in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia that had eaten winged bean for 1,000 years kept growing it, but global food policy moved on. Studies confirmed the National Academy of Sciences was right. Winged bean contains complete protein, significant iron, calcium, and B vitamins, the full package. Research has also documented anti-nutritional factors that are fully neutralized by cooking. The roots are particularly notable. They fix nitrogen like other legumes but produce tubers that taste like water chestnuts and contain up to 20% protein higher than almost any other root vegetable on Earth. Traditional preparation in Papua New Guinea involves stir-frying young pods with ginger and coconut milk, a dish that takes 15 minutes and delivers a nutritional profile most protein bars can only approximate. Seeds are also roasted and ground into a high-protein flour. We had a solution to global protein deficiency in 1975. We walked away from it. That decision was made in boardrooms, not laboratories. Number 16. Purslane. The weed your landscaper pulls that could have fed your family. Portulaca oleracea. You have probably pulled it out of your garden or driveway cracks without knowing what it was. Purslane has been eaten continuously since ancient Egypt, documented in texts from 3000 BCE, and was a staple of Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and Mexican cooking for thousands of years. Roman soldiers carried it dried in their packs. Gandhi listed it among his preferred foods. It grows in cracks in concrete. It requires nothing from you. The forgotten moment was slow and cultural. As processed food became the marker of middle-class aspiration in post-war America, eating things that grew wild weeds especially became associated with poverty. Purslane, which required no purchase and no cultivation, became invisible. Gardening culture redefined it as a pest. Within 2 generations, most Americans had lost the ability to recognize it as food. Studies show purslane contains more omega-3 fatty acids than any other leafy vegetable, more than spinach, more than kale, more than arugula. Research confirms significant levels of vitamin E, vitamin C, and melatonin. It is also one of the only plant sources of EPA, the form of omega-3 most commonly associated with brain health in fish oil studies. This plant is growing in your yard right now. Traditional preparation is effortless. Young stems and leaves are washed and eaten raw. In salads, the texture is slightly succulent, and the flavor is mildly tart. In Turkey and Greece, it is braised with garlic and olive oil. In Mexico, it appears in scrambled eggs. Anywhere you would use spinach, purslane works. Caution: like many leafy greens, purslane contains oxalic acid. People prone to kidney stones should limit consumption of raw purslane. Cooking reduces oxalic acid levels significantly. Most Americans spend money buying omega-3 supplements made in factories, while the best plant source of omega-3 in the vegetable kingdom grows in their driveway and gets sprayed with herbicide. Read that sentence again. Number 17. Pine nut lily. The calorie cache that resistance fighters carried in their coat linings. During World War II, partisan fighters in occupied Poland and Ukraine survived on a list of wild foods that could be foraged without raising suspicion. Near the top of that list was the dried bulb of the mardigan lily, Lilium mardigan, and its close relatives, the wild bulbous lilies, known collectively across Eastern European folk traditions as field onion lilies. Dried and pressed flat, the bulbs packed extraordinary caloric density into almost no space. Resistance couriers sewed them into coat linings, waistbands, and boot insoles. A full day's emergency calories, invisible to guards. The forgotten moment is a survival story in reverse. After the war, the urgency that had kept this knowledge alive, the desperate need to know what in the landscape could keep you alive, disappeared. Peacetime prosperity erased the need to remember. Within 1 generation, the specific knowledge of which lily bulbs were edible and how to prepare them had retreated to rural grandmothers in Eastern Europe and native communities in the American West who had independently discovered the same survival technique. Studies on edible lily species, including Lilium canadense, Lilium columbianum, and related varieties, confirm the nutritional value. Research documents significant starch and sugar content in the bulbs, comparable to small potatoes. Indigenous nutritional research also confirms meaningful calcium and potassium levels. The caloric concentration that made them valuable to resistance fighters is real and documented. Caution, and this cannot be stated strongly enough. Many lily species have toxic lookalikes, and several bulbous plants that grow in similar environments are deadly. Wild garlic has a distinctive odor. Edible lily bulbs have white layered scales. Death camas, which is lethal, grows in the same zones and looks similar to the untrained eye. Do not harvest any wild bulb without expert identification. This knowledge requires direct instruction, not YouTube alone. Traditional preparation by native communities of the Pacific Northwest involved pit roasting lily bulbs overnight, wrapped in damp leaves in an earth oven, producing a sweet, starchy food with a flavor described as a cross between potato and sweet onion. The people who carried these in their coat linings were not survivalists. They were teachers, musicians, and farmers who had learned from necessity what we have forgotten in comfort. Number 18. Breadfruit, the Pacific Island superfood that almost ended a revolution and then got forgotten. In 1787, King George III sent HMS Bounty to Tahiti on a mission to collect breadfruit Artocarpus altilis and transport it to the Caribbean as cheap food for enslaved people. The plan ended with the most famous mutiny in naval history. The breadfruit never arrived. A second expedition eventually succeeded in 1793. The Caribbean adopted it. And then, quietly, over the following century, breadfruit's extraordinary capabilities were largely forgotten in Western food culture, even as Pacific Islander communities never stopped depending on it. The forgotten moment in the American context is commercial. When canned food, refrigeration, and industrial distribution systems made it possible to ship food across continents, there was no market for a large tropical starchy fruit that spoiled within days of harvest. Breadfruit was left out of global food economics. The Pacific Islander communities who depended on it were simply not the market being designed for. Studies show breadfruit is nutritionally complete in ways that most staple crops are not. Research confirms it contains all 9 essential amino acids rare for a fruit. It also provides significant fiber, potassium, vitamin C, and complex carbohydrates with a lower glycemic index than white rice. Hawaiian research programs have documented traditional varieties with more than twice the nutrient density of commercially available forms. Traditional preparation across Polynesia, Micronesia, and the Caribbean varies by island tradition. In Hawaii, breadfruit was wrapped in ti leaves and cooked overnight in an underground imu oven. In Jamaica, it is roasted directly over open fire until the skin blackens and the starchy interior softens. Both preparations produce a food with the satisfying density of fresh bread, which explains the name. A British king sent a ship around the world for this. It started a mutiny, and we still have not figured out how to put it on a grocery shelf. That is the kind of irony that should keep you up at night. Number 19. Ground elder. The medieval famine food Roman soldiers planted wherever they camped. Every country the Roman legions occupied has ground elder growing in it. Aegopodium pod agraria. Roman soldiers carried the seed specifically because the plant established quickly, came back year after year without replanting, and could be eaten as raw leaves in spring or cooked as a pot herb in any season. They planted it as an intentional food deposit, a living supply cache that would be there for the next army or the next generation or whoever survived. The forgotten moment is one of the most complete reversals in food history. Ground elder went from intentional military food crop to despised garden weed within a few hundred years of the Roman Empire's collapse. In Britain, where it is known as bishop's weed or gout weed, it is now considered one of the most invasive and difficult garden plants to eliminate. The properties that made Roman legions plant it indestructibility, year-round availability, are the exact properties that make modern gardeners furious about it. Studies confirm ground elder has a real nutritional profile. Research documents vitamin C, beta-carotene, and flavonoids, including quercetin, a compound studied for its anti-inflammatory and antihistamine properties. Traditional European herbal records document its use specifically for gout, joint inflammation, and as a spring tonic after winter. The flavonoid content is not negligible. Traditional preparation in Scandinavian and British medieval kitchens involved blanching young spring leaves for 60 seconds in boiling water, then sautéing with butter, garlic, and salt. The flavor is distinctly herbal, somewhere between parsley and celery. It is best used as a cooking green, not a raw salad leaf. Caution: ground elder belongs to the Apiaceae family, the same family as poison hemlock and water hemlock, both deadly. Positive identification of young leaves before harvest is essential. Experienced foragers recommend learning this plant from someone who knows it in person before attempting to harvest it alone. The Roman legions planted a food system in every country they conquered. We turned it into a garden problem. That is either the best argument for how far we have drifted from practical knowledge, or the most impressive testament to Roman agricultural stubbornness. Maybe both. Number 20. Devil's Claw. The Kalahari survival route that kept civilizations alive through droughts that lasted decades. In the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa, one of the most demanding survival environments on Earth, the Sand people have depended for thousands of years on a root that grows up to 5 feet underground. Harpagophytum procumbens. Devil's Claw. During the worst droughts in Kalahari, memory droughts that lasted not months, but decades, this root kept people alive when everything else had died. The Sand understood that the desert was not empty. It was a library. Devil's Claw was one of the most important books in it. The forgotten moment is happening right now. Devil's Claw was discovered by Western pharmaceutical companies in the 20th century, initially for its documented anti-inflammatory properties. The root is now harvested commercially across Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa at volumes that researchers describe as unsustainable. The communities that have stewarded this plant for millennia receive a fraction of the commercial value. In several regions, wild populations are already in documented decline. The San are watching a food and medicine that kept their civilization alive through unimaginable conditions being extracted for profit by people who have no living relationship to it. Studies confirm devil's claw contains harpagicide and iridoid glycoside with documented anti-inflammatory and analgesic properties. Multiple peer-reviewed clinical trials show significant reductions in lower back pain and osteoarthritis symptoms. The European Medicines Agency has approved devil's claw preparations for temporary relief of joint pain. This is not folk medicine speculation. This is peer-reviewed pharmacology confirming what the San have known for thousands of years. Traditional San preparation involved slow roasting the secondary tubers, not the primary root, in fire embers until soft, then eating them as a starchy, slightly bitter food during famines. The primary root was prepared as a tea for pain and fever. The preparation method determined the use. The knowledge of which part to eat and which to brew was passed through generations. Caution: devil's claw has documented interactions with anticoagulant medications, antiarrhythmic drugs, and diabetes medications. Research confirms it may affect blood pressure. Anyone taking prescription medications should consult a physician before using it in therapeutic doses. This is a pharmacologically active plant, not a garnish. A civilization survived decades of drought because they understood one plant growing 5 feet underground in the desert. We classified their knowledge as primitive. We then spent 50 years and billions of research dollars confirming everything they already knew. The San never needed our confirmation. We needed theirs. What you just walked through is not a list of 20 plants. It is a map of a world that existed before industrial agriculture decided what you should eat, what should grow in your yard, what should be classified as a weed, and what knowledge was worth keeping. Every single crop in this video was not lost because it stopped working. It was replaced because a different system needed it gone, or ignored because that system had no profitable use for it. The people who grew these crops fed armies, outlasted empires, survived droughts, and raised children in conditions that would shut down most modern supply chains in a week. They were not primitive. They were precise. And we called their knowledge weeds. Here is your challenge starting today. The next time you walk past a vacant lot, a ditch, a wetland, or your own backyard, stop for 30 seconds and ask yourself what is actually growing there. Not to eat it today, just to see it. The first step back to this knowledge is noticing that it exists. If this video changed how you see the plants around you, hit like. It takes 1 second, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of knowledge matters. Now drop a comment. Which crop on this list are you most likely to actually try growing or finding amaranth or purslane? 2 answers. Both are available right now. I want to know. And if you believe some knowledge is worth fighting to keep, subscribe. You are not clicking a button. You are saying that the world your grandparents understood still has something left to teach. The food that kept civilizations alive is not in a museum. It is in a crack in the sidewalk, a marsh at the edge of town, and a seed catalog that most people never open. The question has never been whether the knowledge still exists. The question is whether anyone cares enough to remember it.